All right, rock and roll. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can do that just real quick. Or maybe I can. I might not be able to. Like I start the record and I do the thing. Hold on. So where we're gonna kick off is where we're gonna kick off is the forward to the second edition. It's page XV, and it is the very bottom paragraph because we stopped about halfway through, and you should be able to change your name now. Let me know when it's. I guess let me know when it's changed, and then I'll do the security setting again. So forward to the second edition, very bottom paragraph, and I'm just going to have a natural pause so that everyone can. Oh, perfect. So that everyone can find it, and I can do all the the host tools. I feel so spiffy that I was able to get that done. I feel smooth. You guys don't need to validate that. All righty. So, bottom paragraph, page XV, forward to the second edition. It says the spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. Now, if you weren't here last week, this you can make some notes. Now, if you're here last week, you're like, girl, this is some review. I know, how convenient. Don't worry, we got all of you included. So if you're writing in your book, why wouldn't you? I hear it's what all the cool kids at the Lunacy Commission do. Uh, not, I'm just kidding. But peer pressure. All the cool kids work the 12 steps as a way of life, like their life depends on it. Heck yeah, look at all those cool kids we got. Cool kids are recovery. All right, so what we're talking about is the start of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the New York stockbroker was Bill Wilson. And you can make a little note. And he was more of a stock speculator than a stock broker, but that's neither here nor there. And the Akron physician was our guy, Dr. Bob Smith. And it just, you can make a note that that's who is who. And I want to point out what started Alcoholics Anonymous, what started this fellowship was not Bill Wilson's sobriety date, but Dr. Bob's sobriety date, the first successful 12-step call. Because it's not about one alcoholic, it's about one alcoholic helping another. And when I say successful, I mean Bill Wilson had been working for 6 months, we'll read that, carrying the message to others, and nobody else had stayed sober, but it was successful because he had stayed sober. So Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, that is the start of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that it emphasizes how important working with others is, how important carrying this message is. So it says 6 months earlier. Oh, no worries. Come back when you're. She's gone. Something came up. Come back when you're able. I'd say just keep coming back, but she's gone. Also, just stay works really well. But if you got to log off, it's okay too. All right. So 6 months earlier, that broker is Bill Wilson, had been relieved of his drink obsession. So the drink obsession is the mental obsession. That is the thought that I have when I am as sober as I am today. That thought that takes me back time and time again to the first drink, the first drug, the first hit, the first hoot, the first compulsive behavior. That. And it looks a little something like this time will be different. It looks a little something like nobody will ever know. It looks a little something like that. I'll go out for 3 days. You know what I mean? I'll get it back together on Monday. So that mental obsession has been relieved by and it says sudden. And we don't have to stress too much out about sudden. But what I want to emphasize with sudden is that it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. It does not take long to be recovered. It does not take long to be one of the cool kids, you know? You don't have to engage in my childish bullying. All the cool kids work steps. Woo! But it says by a sudden spiritual experience. And if you're writing in your book, when we say spiritual experience, it's unfortunate because it's at the bottom of one page and top of the other. What you can do is you can make a little note that says solution. Because in Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous and Drug Addicts Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous and any 12-step fellowship, our solution is a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. That is what I am after. And it's important for me to understand anything less than that, and I will continue to relapse. Anything less than a spiritual awakening, and I will relapse. So that's our solution. And it says, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. And if you're writing in your book, again, I hear it's what the cool kids do, you can make a little note that that alcoholic friend is our guy, Ebby Thatcher, E-B-B-Y, and then Thatcher, T-H-A-T-C-H-E-R. And if you're wanting to impress people, I don't think this would impress anyone, but if you got the fun fact, his middle name, Throckmorton, Yeah, Throckmorton, which is the coolest, of all the coolest middle name, Throckmorton. So you'll remember that. And so it goes on to say he had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. So what it's saying is Dr. Silkworth is the gentleman who essentially in two statements wrote the doctor's opinion. And Dr. Silkworth, he worked in Towns Hospital, and Towns Hospital was essentially a detox, a rehab in New York City. It was right across the street from Central Park. And he worked with thousands of alcoholics and drug addicts. So his opinion on what our illness is of vital importance. So, and it says, from this doctor, the broker, that is Bill Wilson, had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. And if you're writing in your book, right beside grave nature of alcoholism, we can make a little note that that is our problem. Our problem is the grave nature of alcoholism. And what makes it grave is that I have an allergy of the body. That once I start, I cannot stop. I cannot control the amount that I take once I take a drink or a drug or a mind-altering substance or whatever brings you to this study. Once I start, I can't stop. So physical allergy. And we can also make a note that we have a mental obsession, the obsession of the mind. So when I am as sober as I am today, but my illness is untreated, I have a thought that takes me back. And that is what makes this illness grave. That is what makes it fatal. I need to stay sober. I have to stay sober. I want to stay sober, but I cannot stay sober. And it is fatal. So those two things, that is my problem. And it says, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what the Oxford group is. But well, I guess I'll do it now. Just while Terry's wrangling the little guy. So the Oxford group, they had nothing to do inherently with alcoholism or drug addiction. The Oxford group was a religious organization whose sole purpose was about having a deeper experience of God. It was the God of their own understanding, but that was their whole purpose. And so they had a series of actions that any human being could take to create a deeper experience of God. And so for our purposes, for our learning purposes, the tenet of the Oxford group that Bill Wilson was like, I'm not down with that. For learning purposes, that was organized religion. And we'll see how that, for our learning purposes, that is also included in his study. And welcome everyone and anyone that just joined us. We're on page XVI. It's forward to the second edition. So if you find that page, you flip it, we're right there, XVI. So it says he was convinced of the need for moral inventory. Well, that sounds like a fourth step, doesn't it? Sounds like I'm writing inventory. And it says confession of personality defects. Well, that sounds like a fifth step to me. Restitution to those harmed, making amends. That sounds like a ninth step. Helpfulness to others. That sounds like step 12. And then it says and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And I think the belief in, we're on page XVI. We're the second page in the forward to the second edition. Just because when we're in Roman numerals, it's like I'm just saying gibberish, but XVI, second page, forward to the second edition. And then when it says the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, that sounds like steps 2, step 3, step 6, step 7, step 11. Awesome. Glad you're able to find it. And so, I was going to throw it over to Terry, but I might not. So what we can do is right there, we can make a little note that says program of action, because there's Terry. So we've got a solution, which is a spiritual experience. We have our problem, which is the grave nature of alcoholism. I have a physical allergy. I have a mental obsession. And I need to get from that hopelessness to that hope. I need to get from that problem to that solution. And how I do that is the 12 steps. That is our program of action. And so Terry, if you're good, I'll throw it over to you before I do a bit of a deep dive, tying all these things together.
Let's go into the deep dive. Let's go.
All right, heck yeah. All right, so I'm just going to bear with me. I'm on a different device. Whoop. And hopefully y'all can see that. I don't know if I can zoom in, and if me zooming in is like helps you guys see it. But let's tie this together. How did this come to be? And you can, if you want to jump in your book to page 26, you can. I'm not going to read it out, but I'm going to summarize it and paraphrase it. So on page 26, we've got, always call them my homies. We got my homie, and my homie is Rowland Hazard. Hazard a guess? He might be an alcoholic. And so Rowland Hazard, listen, he's really Rowland Hazard the third, because he is our certain American businessman. And Rowland Hazard happened to be an alcoholic. And on page 26, we see Rowland Hazard. He's doing everything and anything that he can to throw against his alcoholism. He's seeing the best psychiatrists and psychologists in the United States, and he's got money to throw at it. And nothing is working. So out of desperation, he goes and he sees Dr. Carl Jung. And he goes all the way to Switzerland to work with Dr. Carl Jung, and he does intensive treatment with Dr. Carl Jung. Now, if you're looking and you're thinking, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic, I don't know if I'm an addict, I don't know if I'm hopeless. Anyone here ever do intensive treatment? And then let me guess, if your situation's a little like Rowland, anyone here ever do intensive treatment and then relapse right after? Because that was Rowland. Yeah. So he does this intensive treatment, works with Carl Jung, and he's saying, like, listen, this time feels different. Anyone leave treatment and say, this time feels different, And immediately he goes out and he gets drunk. And he goes back to Carl Jung and he says, dude, what the heck? What the heck, dude? And that's verbatim. You can run that by Gary, the historian. Like, you know what I mean? He totally called him dude. I always like to add color to the history and just make up my own things about how they spoke to each other. And Carl Jung was like, my homie Rowland. Okay, they probably didn't talk like that, but he's like, I'm sorry. Like he said, my bad, guy, my bad. He said, I'm sorry, I misdiagnosed you. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, and people like you do not recover. And Rowland Hazard feels like the gates of hell have closed on him with a clang. He experiences his hopelessness. And in that moment of hopelessness, he's like, man, is there no exception? And Carl Jung says, yes. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics like you have had what are called vital spiritual awakenings, vital spiritual experiences. And he describes them as a phenomenon. And they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. And he talks about how the ideas and attitudes that were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men suddenly are cast to one side in a completely new set of conceptions. And what that means, a completely new set of motives, ideas. The way I show up to life is radically different. And it's like, I was trying to give that to you, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic. And Rowland Hazard is like, okay, spirituality, that's great. Like, I go to church. And Carl Jung is like, my guy, it's like great that you're going to church. Like, that means you're open to spirituality. But the odds of you experiencing a spiritual awakening are like the odds of you getting struck by lightning. You can't hang out in a church pew and hope this happens for you. You've got to go out and seek it. And what was growing in popularity at that time. So Rowland Hazard has knowledge of what our solution is, a spiritual awakening. That is our solution. but he doesn't have it and he doesn't know how to get it. And what was growing in popularity at that time was known as the Oxford Group. And it was growing in popularity in Oxford University. And just, I won't go too much into the history of the Oxford Group, but its founder, Frank Buchman, he was a gentleman who, his spiritual awakening began with him realizing that he might have been wrong. You know, it started with him realizing I need to make an amends. And how often does my spiritual awakening begin with, oops, I was wrong? You know what I'm saying? And so he gets involved in the Oxford Group. Again, the Oxford Group had nothing to do with alcoholism or drug addiction or anything of that sort. Their sole purpose was about cultivating a deeper experience of God. And they wanted to like bring that out into the world. And from them, we got a course of action, a series of actions that later became our 12 steps. So Roland Hazard, he shows up, he doesn't have the best motives. He only wanted to give his mom a couple happy memories before he inevitably died of alcoholism. That was his motivation. But he works through these 12 steps. And as a result, he begins to stay sober. Now, he's a rich guy. And so he's going to go summer in Vermont. And he's showing up, he's summering in Vermont. And it is the exact week that our homie Ebby Thatcher, Throckmorton, what a handsome fella, our homie Ebby Thatcher, he is on trial. Now, Ebby Thatcher, he did some things. I'm sure no one here has ever done anything illegal. But one of the things that Ebby Thatcher did was the first thing he did was he drove drunk. I'm sure nobody did this, but keep in mind, he's driving drunk in rural Vermont in the 1930s. There's not much to hit. He manages to crash into an old lady's farmhouse, rolls down the window, is like, "What's for dinner? You got some coffee?" You know what I mean? And the other thing he did is he started drinking. And you know, when you get a couple drinks in and you're like, I can do a project, you know, he gets a little projecty, not so drunk that like there's no project, but a little drunk. And he started painting his house. And then birds showed up. And birds are apt to do what birds are apt to do, which is poop. And so he's like, don't poop on my half-finished paint job that I did so great on, you know? And so he does the only logical thing, which is to grab a shotgun, which is not cool in rural Vermont in the 1930s. So Ebby Thatcher is on trial. And if you go to page 9, Ebby Thatcher talks about how 2 men appeared in court persuading him to suspend his commitment. And they, in that moment, Roland Hazard shows up. He shows up with a gentleman by the name of Seba Graves. There was also a guy by the name of Shep Cornell. And I always imagined that rural Vermont in the 1930s, like it'd be a little bit of a Real Housewives situation, you know, Real Housewives of Vermont, you know, the fancy pants people. And I'm sure that Roland Hazard, his drinking exploits was all over and all over the gossip. You know, he was the hot goss. Everyone was spilling the tea on Roland, right? And so they knew about his drinking. And I wonder if perhaps news of his recovery was also the hot gossip. You see, the judge was Judge Graves, Seba Graves's father. And it's reported as saying, I don't know if this part's exactly true, but it's reported as saying, only for you, Roland. Ebby Thatcher, he's got to be sober on Monday. Otherwise, he's going 6 months in jail. Now, Ebby Thatcher doesn't want to go to jail. And so he works these steps and he has a spiritual awakening. And he's got to go carry that message. He's staying sober. He's 2 months sober, and he goes and carries the message to our intrepid hero, Bill Wilson. Now, Bill Wilson, before Ebby Thatcher shows up, he had been hospitalized a number of times in the town's hospital where he met Dr. Silkworth. In his first hospitalization, he learned of what his problem is. So keep in mind, Ebby Thatcher now knows the solution of spiritual awakening. He knows the program of action, the 12 steps. And now Bill Wilson, he's off and he's drinking, and he goes to the town's hospital, and town's hospital, Dr. Silkworth is there, and he gives him knowledge of what his problem is. You've got a physical allergy, an allergy of the body. Once you start, you cannot stop, and you have a mental obsession. Your willpower, when it comes to not taking the first drink, it's weakened. Like, you don't have the power to not take the first drink. And Bill Wilson's like, I got it, self-knowledge, and he drinks again. And he goes back to the hospital, I think 2 other times. It's recorded just as one in his story, but he goes back and he learns that he's going to die of alcoholism. And he gets discharged and he drinks again. and he's drinking, and Abby Thatcher shows up and brings him the notion of what our solution is, what the program of action is, and Bill Wilson has knowledge of what our problem is. And Bill Wilson is the first person in history to have access to these three pieces of information, because this is what I need to know in order to have sobriety and recovery in 12-step. What is my problem? What is the solution? And what is the program of action? And if anyone wants any of the visuals, I'll put them in some of the WhatsApp chats. Oh man, I meant to put the WhatsApp chats and all that stuff in the thing. So what I will do is I will stop the share and I will turn it over. Is there anything you wanted to say about that, Terry?
No, I just was really enjoying listening to you actually. Very pertinent to learn about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous and how we are here today. There's just so much rich history here. I highly recommend that you check out those other books that are towards the beginning of our book where it says other books. AA Comes of Age, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, Pass It On. Read about our history and how we blossomed to where we are at today. I'm good, man. That was awesome.
Absolutely. Let's keep going. That is lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So it says back on XVI. So if you guys were bouncing around, back on XVI. Yeah, I know, shocker that we would do any sort of bouncing. So it says prior to his journey to Akron. So before Bill Wilson had gone to Akron, Ohio, it's a city in Ohio. It used to be the rubber capital of the world. You don't need that information, but you're getting it. Oh, that's where they had the tires. So prior to his journey to Akron, the broker, that's Bill Wilson, had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. Now, I'm going to tell a story. And first, I'm going to point out, I don't think this story's true. I haven't been able to find any sort of evidence that it's true. I think Howard's here and Gary, you guys will let me know if I get it wrong or when I get it wrong. So here's the thing. I always say, I'm never going to let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I'm going to tell this because sometimes when we talk about the history, we find that we'll find out that Bill Wilson is not a good historian. He's not a good record keeper. But it's part of it is because when we tell our story, we're telling our story to make a point. Our stories are almost parables, lessons. And so I'm going to tell this story that's probably not true, but it's too good not to tell. And so what is true is that Bill Wilson, he was working hard with other alcoholics for 6 months. And what is true is that nobody else was staying sober. And what is likely not true, but I'm telling it anyways, is Bill Wilson, he's like, Lois, Lois is still supporting him. He's trying to work, but he's really working with other alcoholics. Lois is still, doing all this work, trying to support him. And he's like, Lois, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop working with these drunks. Nobody's staying sober. You've been so good in supporting me. I'm going to go and I'm going to try to help you really focus on getting work. And in that moment, Lois Wilson absolutely did not, but absolutely said she didn't. But Bill, you stayed sober. And this was the first time, like there was something different about his sobriety. And there's truth in that. There was something different about his sobriety. So Bill Wilson goes back to Dr. Bob, or not to Dr. Bob, goes back to Dr. Silkworth and is like, hey, my homie. That's how they spoke back then. Not true. My homie. What's happening? Nobody's staying sober. And Dr. Silkworth's like, my guy, how are you 12-stepping these guys? I mean, it wasn't called 12-stepping back then, but he's like, how are you 12-stepping these guys? And he's like, I'm telling them all about my spiritual awakening at white light on the mountaintop. Woo, lift it up, rock and roll, feeling good, having a great time. And Dr. Silkworth's like, dude, no, dude, don't do that. That's not cool. That is not chill. What if you shared from your own experience what I shared with you? What if you shared what it was like with the allergy and what it was like with the obsession? Share about the hopelessness, how I shared with you. And he's like, got it. I'm going to do that next time. The next guy he did that with was Dr. Bob. And we're going to talk about that here in a bit. Now, that part of the story about Lois saying that, probably not true. But what is true is the Fellowship of Al-Anon was started when Lois Wilson was fed up with Bill Wilson at all his meetings. And she said, damn your meetings. And she threw a shoe at him. And I just want to point out that a lot of incredible things can start with a resentment. Like, we can't live there. But, you know, if we see that it's a resentment, we take spiritual action. Do not throw shoes at your spouse. We use our words in 12-step. We use our words and we write inventory. We 10-step, no throwing things. But that's how Al-Anon started, right? Yeah, that's true. Alrighty. So prior to his journey to Akron, the broker, Bill Wilson, had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron, so he goes to the rubber capital of the world, you know, the Bridgestones, the Firestones, the Goodyears, you know, and he was going to combine these companies and he was going to be rich. He was going to go back to I Had Arrived. You know, we'll talk about I Had Arrived. He's like, I will arrive. So he arrives in Akron and it was bogged down. Now, I heard two things. I heard it was bogged down in lawsuits, but also that there was a bit of a hostile takeover. Regardless, it didn't work. And his reputation was ruined in the process. Anyone ever get like hurt feelings when people were talking bad about you? You know what? I'm sure I'm the only one that's that sensitive. But like me thinking about me and what people think about me, you know. And so he was like just discredited and broke, and he's alone in this Mayflower hotel. And again, I just want to point something out. Where does a spiritual awakening begin? With me not getting what I want, me not getting the things that I feel or I believe are so, so important. Isn't that true? That's where I don't get what I want and instead I get what I need. So the broker, Bill Wilson, had gone on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. And this, if you've ever seen like the movie My Name is Bill W., it's good at like dramatizing it, but how I like to imagine it is Bill Wilson in the Mayflower Hotel. He doesn't have the money to pay his bill, and to the right of him is the bar, and you can hear the laughter, the ha 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 ha, and the clink 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 of the ice in the glass, you know what I mean? And to the left of him is the telephone booth, you know, to make that call, to call another alcoholic, to find somebody to work with. And he feels the call of alcoholism, you know, the call of that drink. You know, it'll be fine. You've been sober 6 months. You could handle 6 drinks, no more. And he has fear and it grips him, you know. He knows it's the mental obsession. Now, in that moment, he was restored to sanity. He was able to see that it was a mental obsession. Why? Because he had been working his butt off trying to carry this message to other alcoholics. He goes to the telephone booth, he picks up the receiver and he makes some calls. He doesn't make one call, he makes a series of calls. He gets a hold of Reverend Walter Tunks, who gets a hold of somebody by the name of Norman Shepherd, who gets a hold of my homegirl. Now, she is my girl, Henrietta Seiberling, the Sibes. She would hate that I called her that. The Sibes, Henrietta Seiberling. And she answers the phone. And he's like, listen, I'm a rum hound. I'm a gin hound from New York. I'm a drunk. Could you have anyone that I could work with? And Henrietta Seiberling says, this is manna. Manna is the food of the gods. Like this, what she's saying is this is heaven. This is an answered prayer. A couple weeks earlier, what they had done is that they had a prayer group for Dr. Bob because they could see that he was struggling. And that answered prayer was a drunk saying, I got to go help somebody. And if you're ever unsure, I mean, I love the history. I love the history that's not fully true. It doesn't matter if, Ebby and Bill met at the kitchen table or upstairs in the living room and Lois was there. It doesn't matter. I love our history because when we look at our history, for me, I cannot help but see the undeniable presence of God. You know what I mean? And if you're like, man, I don't know, I'm struggling with this higher power. Go ask a loved one if your sobriety is not an answered prayer. And deeper than that, the most incredible thing is I get to go out into the world and be an agent for God and be a small part of somebody else's prayers being answered. You know what I mean? A drunk willing to help another drunk. That is how God works. And Henrietta Seiberling gets a hold of Anne Smith, and they make that connection, and it is incredible. And so it goes on to say he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry. It's a little musty in here. You know what I mean? We talk about like not just suggestions, it's a little musty. Now it is a suggestion. Nobody has to do it. But if I want the freedom, if I want the recovery, if I don't want to continue to relapse and I don't want to be bound in the bondage of self, I must. So it's a little musty, but no pressure. So he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message. What is the message, right? Problem, solution, program of action to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. That is Dr. Bob. Is there anything you wanted to say about that paragraph, Terry?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there, and that was great, Paige. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, pew pew pew. I mean,
Pew, pew, pew.
thinking about this, he knew this is something that we're all going to come across, and point of our recovery, and you don't think that you're ready to help someone, and you don't know if you could deliver the message, and this and that. Shut up. It's going down. You're going to help someone, and it's it's pertinent for us to stay sober to do so. Now, it's not a selfish motive. It's me giving in order to get this spiritual awakening and continuously grow it at the same time. And I love where it says, I suddenly realized that sounds like it comes from my ninth step a little bit, right? Suddenly realized, that's a description of what it looks like to enter into the world of the spirit. I mean, think about this. This dude had a spiritual awakening when he was looking at that phone book or whatever, and thinking about another alcoholic when that little, what is it, the chatter from the bar was calling his name, the whisper, the minion, the fantasy was calling his name in order to come drink. And he had a saint thought or a God thought that said, what about my family? What about those other alcoholics? What about them? And he actually took action on it, right? And suddenly it's a time frame. If you think about it, it's right here, right now. Look at Jim's story. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind that an ounce of whiskey wouldn't hurt me on a full stomach. The insane thought is in the now. But who else is also chilling there, Paige? God is. So what we're doing is we're building a relationship with this now, or God, or whatever you want to call it, which will separate us from taking action. Because we're going to have an insane thought that creeps in. And he took that action, and all of a sudden, what did it say? The sanity returned, right? It's imperative. I mean, they're setting us up they're literally going to tell us in the next page that strenuous work, doing 12-step work, is going to be vital for permanent recovery. This is not a witchcraft word that we're going to be talking about, right? We're going to be talking about permanent recovery, a basis, an underlying support or foundation. And I love the meeting that he has with Dr. Bob. If you don't mind, if I could read it, that'll be cool. It says, this physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means, godly means, to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. So he had God. Faith without works is dead, right? I can believe in God all I want. I mean, I know people that are priests that pray more than I do in one day than I would do in my entire life, and they can't stop drinking, which is probably another form of agnostic temperament, meaning I know there's everything there is about God, right? But I do believe there's a God in my life, but I'm not living like it, right? But he tried all that stuff. But when the broker or Bill or the speculator, right? Bill did like to stretch the truth a little bit, right? But that was the whole point. He stretched the truth to make a point, right? And it does a good job because we're all chilling here on a Friday night. I don't know how many people are here, but 43 people reading a book about recovery, right? Hey, yeah. But the broker, speculator, whatever, gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism, right? The mind and the body and its hopelessness. The physician, the anal doctor, the butt doctor, began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered and never drank again up to the point of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alky could affect another as so not alcohol could. It also indicated that strenuous work with another alcoholic with another was vital for permanent recovery. And you know, Bill was like, what? Bob what gave him what 15 minutes, right? Like, yo, you got 15 minutes, bro. That's how they talked back then. You know, Page did a great job. He said, my man or my homies. We got a lot of historians here. You guys could back us up, right? Was I being dishonest today? Possibly, right? But I'm trying to make a point here, just like Bill did. And he only had 15 minutes, right? Bill only had 15 minutes, and he didn't hit him with God, because Dr. Silky said, stop talking about that. Hit him with the stone cold facts of alcoholism. And what he did is he hit him with that and the story. And then after Bill was, Bill was done, he's going to grab his coat, he's putting it on, and Dr. Bob's like, yo, hold on, bro. Bruh, that's how they talk back then, right? Hold on, bro. Let me tell you my story. Right? And they shared experience, strength, and hope. Right? And think about that. If you boil this program, everything into a blender, and you throw the big book in there, you throw the traditions in there, you throw the meetings in there, you throw the concepts in there, you throw whatever, every single history in there, everything. And you put it in a blender, you shake it up, and you pour it into a drink. It's just one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. That's what we're doing here. We're storytellers here. Don't stop telling your story. You never know who you're going to help. You never know where a word could have an impact on this person's life. I just heard this from Sandy Beach. I believe it's Sandy Beach. I might be stretching the truth. I might not remember it right. He said, I came to believe by seeing God working through you. And how true is that? And say hi, Phoenix. Right? And look at this. Vital means necessary for life. I mean, guys ever been to the hospital? I mean, I've been there multiple times. Six rehabs, countless detoxes. They check your vitals to see if you're alive or dead. So it's alive for what? It's vital for what? Permanent sobriety. Just like we talked about in the forward to the first edition, right? We hope that these pages prove so convincing that no further authentication is necessary. No more drinking is necessary. Permanent recovery. Look at our third step prayer. Third step prayer was our decision was, what was it? Vital. I forgot exactly what it says. Vital, but it didn't have any permanent lasting effect unless followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things that are blocking us. So, I mean, look at Dr. Bob's story. Look at what is it called? Two wives. Look at two employers. He says, "Are you done for good forever? Are you done?" We're talking about, yes, I do have a daily reprieve that's contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition. Reprieve means a delayed judgment or delayed execution. Yes, I'm sitting on death row, delaying my judgment every single day. But the basis, which I highly recommend that every single person here check this out, is look for the words basis, look for the word principles. I mean, there's a bunch of them that I've been looking at the word know and the KNOW. I've been looking at the words be or become, a state of being. I've been just kind of like threads that are all throughout the big book. Look at that. That's all I got. Hold on. I got to put this guy into bed real quick. Paige, take over for a second.
No worries. I got you. Oh, I always love it when Phoenix makes an appearance. Listen, bring your kids, bring your dogs, bring your cats. I'm here for all those distractions. All right. And one of the things that I want to point out about the paragraph that Terry read, when it talks about the physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed, Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group. He was involved in it. And he had been involved in it in some time, but still got drunk every night. Now, Bill Wilson shows up And he's like, man, this guy is speaking my language. And he's like, Dr. Bob says, I am willing to do anything and everything, not amends, but everything and anything, but not that. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, Dr. Bob, he goes to Atlantic City, and he's got a medical conference because, colorectal surgeon, proctologist, he's got some stuff. He goes to like Atlantic City, and the inevitable happens. Because anything less than all of this is a way of life, I will drink again, I will use again, I will relapse. And so that relapse is inevitable. The inevitable happens. He takes a drink in Atlantic City, and he goes on a rip roaring bender. Like, it is bad. Like, it's so bad. He shows up like drunk back in Ohio. He shows up at his office receptionist. Like, imagine blackout drunk showing up at an employee's house. Oh, that's not cool. You know what I mean? And so he's got to have surgery, perform surgery the next morning. So they give him a couple beers and a couple goofballs, which be like benzos, so he could have a steady hand. Goodness gracious, you know what I mean? Dr. Bob struggled financially. I don't know why. Who wouldn't want a drunk proctologist? Little sensitive area. Fair enough, right? And I'm always like, we don't know how that patient fared. Probably fine. The patient was probably fine. I'm sure we'd find out if he wasn't. But he then went off. So we had his rip roaring bender. And then what he do right after going for surgery? He went on what I call an amender. He went out, and I have these little stickers that say amender with Dr. Bob on them, because I make little designs like that, amender. And he went on an amender, and it wasn't until he did the actions he did not want to take that he had that permanent sobriety, and he dove into working with others. Now, real quick, I also want to point out that line, strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, vital to permanent recovery, highlight, underline, stars beside. If I want permanent recovery, like Terry's talking about, I've got to work with others. But I also want to emphasize strenuous. I'm not saying you can't have family. I'm not saying you can't have hobbies, but I've got to be at least a little inconvenienced. You know what I mean? I've got to be inconvenienced. If I'm not inconvenienced, I'm not working with enough people. Awesome. Did you want to read the next paragraph? Did you want me?
Yeah. I wanted to say something real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, he drank, right? And there's a great article by Harry Tiebout called Compliance versus Surrender. And compliance is like a partial surrender, or forgot exactly how it says. Like, yeah, I'm willing to do whatever it takes for victory over alcohol. I'm willing to go to any extreme, but I won't do that. It's like that song. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. And that's what happened, and he didn't do that. And what happened? That was an experience he had to have. Now, I think about all relapse, and I'm a relapser. We all are. If we're truly powerless over alcohol, we're going to drink. Now, what I needed to have is a vital spiritual experience in order to have this permanent recovery. Dr. Bob had to have that last drink. I can't rob anyone of their bottom. I can't rob them of their last drink. That dude had to get his butt thoroughly whooped in order to take actions or steps that really feel like it's the end of the world, because it says on 156 he was trembling when he was making these amends. I mean, yes, granted, he did all his amends in one day in a little ass town, but he did it. And I guess his fear was that they didn't want him to know. They thought they'd find out he's an alcoholic. Everyone knew it. I forgot. I know there's more the history that you could go more into it, but everyone knew that he was an alkie. He was under that delusion that everyone thought that he didn't want anyone to know who he truly was. But everyone does. You just look at our eyes. Straight up, just look at our eyes. Look what our feet are doing. Look what our actions are doing. Are we still selfish and doing inconsiderate habits all the time? Yeah, this dude was on a. He went out there, and it happened for a particular reason. So if you have an experience where you drink after many years of sobriety, if you have that drink, that's an experience you had to have, because that is something that you could use to help another person who is suffering in Alcoholics Anonymous with multiple years of sobriety. Our fifth tradition is not the newcomer. I hate to say this, I know a lot of people don't dislike it, but the newcomer is not the most important person in the room. It is our fifth tradition. This is for the alcoholic who still suffers. And that could be someone with 20, 30 years of sobriety. I was at the jumping off place in recovery because I stopped doing the work. Now, if I have a first step, a step one experience, a thorough step one experience, which is something you can't take, it's something that's an experiential thing. I have two options: either do the work or I'm going to drink again. What? To die an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, right? Either option A or option B. I tried option C, and there is none. Door number three, there's none. But if you have an experience where you're about to pop, that I'm telling you right now, it's either alcoholism. I think Bob D says it. Alcoholism demands treatment. It demands treatment, either more alcohol or more God. Now, you're going to start doing these things that are going to change your life forever, but they feel like it's like you're standing at the bottom of Mount Everest, like you're never going to get up there. Or like, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to rip my skin. Or I have this big empty hole in my heart. Or that pit in your stomach when you're about to do these things that feel like they are super uncomfortable. Paige said it earlier, do the opposite of whatever you don't want to do and watch your life change in order to have what? Permanent recovery. Man, if everyone did exactly what it said in the big book, we would have stadiums filled with us. I look at it, rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. Take that word fail out. Rarely have I seen a person who's thoroughly followed this path. No, there's not millions and millions of people packed with stadiums because this goes against everything that we've ever believed in. It goes against all our old ideas, all our old emotions, right? It goes against the grain on everything. But if you do the opposite of whatever you don't want to do, you could have this transformation, this revelatory experience, this reborn experience. You'll be a different person, right? I mean, yeah, I'll shut up after that. Yeah, I'm done. Pew pew pew.
Pew pew pew. Yeah, it's really like I find my sponsorship style is that's okay, do it anyway. I'm afraid, that's okay, do it anyway. I don't want to, that's okay, do it anyway. You know what I mean? That's okay, do it anyway. And listen, I'm codependent. I will handhold the crap out of that. All right, so it says, hence the two men set to work almost frantically. That frantic work means I know I've got to work with others. I know I've got to carry this message frantically. Upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital, their very first case. And this is Bill Dotson. Bill Dotson. So that, again, this is why we changed the stories, because it was Bill and Bob, and then a Bill and another Bob and a William.
What
and
wasn't
a Rob.
wasn't there AA 2.5?
Yeah,
What was his name?
there was, I think they had tried with some other people before, but like the really like they had gone to but didn't really take, they didn't really do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have 2.5, but I got AA number 4 is Ernie Galbraith. Now that's a whole story that I will not get into right now. That's a thing. But yeah, AA number 3, Bill Dotson. So yeah, and again, kind of they had tried with some people, but like he was the first one that took, and very quickly though. But it says the very first case, Bill Dotson, and it says a desperate one. Desperate. What does desperate mean? Desperate means that I see my hopelessness, right? Recovered. There's that word again. Recovered. And it says immediately, does not take long to get well. And it says he never had another drink. So what we see is we see this hopelessness, taking the action, and then permanent sobriety. Now, again, we talk about permanent sobriety. I got to put an asterisk on it. It is permanent sobriety dependent upon the actions that I take on a daily basis. But that is what is on offer. Permanent, contented, because there's nothing worse than permanent sobriety. I'm happy to be here. You know, like, oh, take 24. Pass it on. Are you happy, joyous, and free? Just let me know. No, right. Permanent, contented sobriety. That's what's on offer, but it's on offer on the contingent on the actions that I take on a daily basis. So recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. And it's important to remember. I mean, where are the results of occasional heartening success? They were like truly flying blind. We'll talk about the flying blind period ended, but they were flying blind, trying to figure out what could help people like us, right? And it says when the broker, so Bill Wilson, he was staying in Akron throughout that summer. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. So what happened is in those early days, we were still a member of the Oxford group. They called us the Drunk Squad. The first time I heard it, there was no way. I'm like, the Oxford group with their doilies and their fancy pants called us the Drunk Squad, but I guess that's true. Called us the Drunk Squad of the Oxford group. And Akron loved the Oxford group. They didn't want to leave. And New York was a part of the Oxford group as well. And it took a while for them to break off. Is there anything you wanted to say about that paragraph?
Yeah, and it says this work. They're not talking about the first 11 steps. They're talking about step 12. Strenuous work, being being slightly inconvenienced all the time to go help someone else, right? This is what they're talking about, and they kept trying, regardless of they tried with a lot of people, and they were unsuccessful. I believe how many did they have for the first year? 7 or something like that. I forgot exactly the exact numbers. I'm not a historian, even though they did say brawl a lot back then. I know. Yeah, that's all. Oh, and one thing they talk about this first AA group being set up, and this is a flying blind period. They're going to be getting us into the traditions as well, which is something that is vital for everybody in here to check it, read up on, and study. I highly recommend that you look into it because there's a particular reason that why all of us are still kicking it right now in this meeting because of the traditions. There's some cat in the background sharing about all the mistakes that we've done in the past and why we shouldn't be able to repeat them again. Hold on, this little kid just came back. All right, Paige.
No worries. It goes on to say a second small group promptly took shape at New York. So in the Akron or in the Oxford group, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. And Cleveland, they were kind of the first to be like, hey, no, we're AA, we're our own thing, and to break off. And, it was started by Clarence Snyder. And if Clarence Snyder, he was a bit of he and Bill did not like each other. And he was a bit of a big personality. But AA grew because of his difficult and big personality. It's just a reminder, if you go to your home group meeting and there's some big personalities, that God uses all of us. You know what I mean? God's using them. And God's using us. And so Clarence Snyder, it says, besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them. So late 1937. So 37, Bill Wilson got sober right before 35. So like we're seeing like 2 years, almost 3 years, not quite 3 years of sobriety, right? That points out that man, people like us didn't get well. And how much of a miracle it is to have 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. You know what I mean? That's a miracle. And that did not happen before this. People en masse, that didn't happen, but they're seeing that there's something here that's working. It's working in a permanent way. And it says the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. And I always make the joke, a new light. That would be a really good name for a big book study that happens on Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, But one of the themes that we're going to pick up on is the theme of God as light, higher power as light, and I love that metaphor of God as light. Because light is not what I see, light is the way in which I see. And if you know what I'm talking about from experience, we take these actions and everything in the world around us changes. And yet nothing changes. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's one of those, that new light, and it is that like darkness that is my alcoholism, and that light comes to me in the depth of my alcoholism, in the depth of my shame, in the depth of my suffering. I just got to reach out and take some actions that I don't like and I don't want to take, but that absolutely transform me. So Terry's wrangling the little one, and we're right at the hour, so why don't I stop the recording, and what we'll do, oh yeah, I'll stop the recording, and we'll wrap it up with a prayer. So there we go. Hold on.